Hello and welcome to our program. Let's start with a wonderful thought for the day. It's by Mahatma Gandhi. Live every day like you will die today and learn like you will live forever. Please join us in welcoming on our show today author and translator Pratishtha Singh. Pratishtha, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Gaura.
You know, there's such a huge area that you cover in your work. You teach, you write, you translate. I think Italian is your pet and your most favorite language. You work with women across the country, and you're so personally motivated that very often it's like an individual activist nature and that role that you take on. So when you wear all these hats, if we shared, if you could give us 2 to 3 lines that described you.
To describe myself, I would say what once I think my mother said. She said that you are one of the most fiercely independent social being that I've ever met, because I am someone who likes to be on my own. I am someone who enjoys reflexive moments which are very internal, but I also really enjoy being with people. When I am working with women, like you said, or when I am teaching, the time I spend with my students, the time I spend with these women is one of the most enriching experiences that I have. And so I would just say that yes, I'm very independent and headstrong, but I always see my existence along with other people.
You deal with languages. You're fluent in English and you write in English. You also write in Hindi, and of course there's Italian. I think language is a means of communication is only limiting it. Language is much more. What does language mean to you?
I should also add probably that I also write in Bhojpuri,
right,
a language that I've learned. Language to me means really just a channel of communications. It is at the end of every conversation that one indulges in. It is the content of that conversation which takes the center stage. Languages are important because they tell you a lot about the cultures that you get connected to through those languages. I personally believe that there is a certain sort of elitist thought sometimes associated with certain languages, and when you travel across a country like India, you feel really enriched by the wealth of languages that we have, and you understand that language is something that these people just use to communicate their thoughts. They are actually really speaking in a much more united fashion, you know, in as much as all of them are Indian, and they share a sort of sensibility. So for me, language is something that brings me closer to cultures on the one hand. On the other hand, it is something that sometimes one does not really need, because sometimes silence also speaks just so much.
Do languages have a sensibility associated with them? And if they do, what are some similar sensibilities between Italian and Hindi?
See, I always say that the English that we speak in India is Indian English. It is our language, really. We have to embrace it the way we speak it. Nobody will speak like that in England or in America.
Right. You've also translated not only prose but even Gulzar Saab's poetry
Yes.
into Italian. When you are translating, so is there something lost in translation?
I'll have to admit, yes. I mean, of course, especially when you're translating biggies like Gulzar Saab and him, I've translated, of course, from Hindustani into Italian. I've translated Dr. Sukrita Paul from English into Italian. And the good thing, or actually one of the more difficult things, is that both of them are very hands-on, and they would tell you, Gulzar Saab is someone who really would say, you please explain to me why you've used this word, and he does not understand Italian.
Okay.
So I really have to open it up for him, peel it like an onion, and tell him, you know, I think this is what it means in Italian, and then he would say whether he agrees or he does not agree with it. For example, one thing that I've often spoken to him about is in his poems in Hindustani there is a word usne, which can mean him or her. And in Italian there is that sense of course, something very similar, him or her. You have to kind of give it either a gender.
Right.
And I asked him what was the gender that he had in mind. He said that it's very difficult for me to tell you that, because sometimes it depends on the reader. Sometimes I want for the reader to decide.
So true.
And sometimes I want for the reader to understand what I'm trying to say. And then in jest he says, what do you think? And I say, for me it's a man. And he says, then for me it's a woman.
Okay.
And an interesting conversation opens up there. So of course there are language, and then when I'm translating other people, for example, because poetry, I've translated only these two poets, and I think again Dr. Paul's you know, English, her English poetry is so Indian in its flavor, the sensibility that you were talking about.
Right.
Sometimes for me it becomes slightly difficult to bring that sensibility into Italian, because it is English with Indian sensibility, and you're trying to bring it into a European language. But then you have long discussions with the poet and you arrive at a possible solution. And it is always very exciting, but I would say yes, there are, I mean, sometimes I feel that I'd much rather prefer reading it, say, in a Hindustani original or an English original. But it is good. I always say that I enjoy translation, because I have, I know that when these works reach Italy or any other part of the world, I'm excited that something from my country is shining outside, and people are able to get some sense of the thought process, the sensitivity with which an Indian creator writes.
When you cross the border of language and the border of understanding, and when you leave understanding aside, I think what we call ehsas, and when somewhere the ehsas also gets communicated, and that's common across people.
Absolutely. The moment you said the word ehsas, I had little goosebumps, because of course it is that at the end of the day, for anyone who creates anything, whether you write or even if you cook, there is something that is very tactile and yet not quite tactile. It is somewhere in between,
and can only be experienced. And sometimes when you're asked to express that, you can just never actually express what you experience. You know, you're so limited. So experience is unlimited, but expression is so limited.
Absolutely. And like you said very correctly, experience is something that is so multifaceted and multi-layered for everyone, and it depends on so many things. It would depend on whether it has rained today, or whether the moon was shining brightly last evening, or if I had a good breakfast. It would be a complex, you know, experiential activity that can't really be expressed.
Right. We also know that, you know, you can become a translator, you can become a teacher, and you learn a language, you get your doctorate in it, and you become an expert. And then experience comes in. And whatever you learned sometime gets completely challenged. Did that happen with you?
Oh, absolutely. It happened, and I should share this, that I am actually a botany graduate.
Okay.
From the University of Delhi, and after doing my graduation, I knew that I wanted to either study something that was only genetics, and because I love the field of genetics, I still read lots of books on genetics. It really inspires me and motivates me. Or I wanted to do something related to cooking.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Because I absolutely love cooking ever since I was a little girl. So I thought, hey, why not? Why don't I just, you know, go and study some foreign language and maybe start understanding their culinary history and see where I go from there. I mean, I'm very grateful to my family, who've always been very okay with me being slightly crazy and letting me do these experiments. And
fiercely independent.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So it was in JNU that I started studying Italian, but then I got scholarships and I kept going back and forth to the country, and I absolutely fell in love with their literature and their sense of philosophy of life, which is so close to the Indian idea of life, of being as opposed to existing. And I really got connected with it, and it was then that I didn't even make a conscious decision. It was just something that sometimes I think I just kept on slipping into it. Sometimes I think I kept on flying towards it. It was something that completely took me over. And now it's been a long time since I still consider myself a student of the language and of the culture, because you can never really learn enough. I mean, I'm still learning about my own country.
True.
So it's a never-ending process, but that is from where it began. And the commerce that I was probably thinking of was to learn how to cook good lasagna or something like that.
And see, so it's the seed, and you really don't know the potential in the seed and what kind of a plant is going to grow out of it.
Absolutely.
So at the onset, congratulations. In the just recently held Jaipur Literary Festival, your book was shortlisted in the top 20 authors, right? You were there. So congratulations.
Thank you.
How did writing happen to you?
I started writing when I was 6. I was writing poems and I was writing some stories. The first story that I wrote of my life, in my entire life, was when I was 13 or 14, I think.
Okay.
And there was a huge tree in front of my house which collapsed after a big storm. And the good thing about that tree was that there used to be lots of parrots which lived on that tree. And we were, as kids, we were all very excited when we saw even one parrot, because they'd usually hide behind the leaves. And we saw the breaking of the tree, we saw the whole thing. It was difficult. We were not, I can't say that I was upset or unhappy. It was just very powerful to see a tree falling down and it raining and the thunder being there. The whole experience was a very strong one. I can't really say that it was necessarily a negative one.
Okay.
The next morning I woke up and there was a parrot sitting on my balcony, on the balcony of my house. And that's when I told my mother that I'm feeling really, really sad, because and as much as my mother said, you always said you wanted to see parrots, right? And you used to complain that you can't really see them. And I said, no, but I don't want to see him like this, having lost his house. And I think that was the first, I kind of made it into a narrative, and that was the first story that I wrote. But from then on, I just wrote, and I wrote a lot of poetry and prose, and in fact, the book, and we would eventually talk about it, is actually a very it's book of my experiences. It was intended as a memoir, but it's not just a memoir. It went on to become the first ethnography in Hindi of Bihar women. And I think that writing is something that, you just flow with it. The way you think, whatever you are thinking, if you are a reflexive being, if you just pick up the pen and start writing it, then you become an author. It's as simple as that. There is nothing more or less. I mean, when I write, most of whatever I write, even if there are passages which one would term as they are philosophical, they are abstract. If for example, I'm talking about, there's one passage in one of my stories that I really like. It is about an ant. Which is going up the knee, the calf of an old woman, and biting the back of her knee. And it's something that obviously one has probably experienced, not experienced, whatever. But that idea is I mean, the way one expresses it is exactly how one has felt it or is feeling it. And so I just pick up the pen and I just start writing, and I think that's where I think the big change in my life was the picking of the pen. The experiencing was happening ever since one was little. It was just when I decided to start writing, that's when I kind of became an author.
Right. So when you talk of this organic movement from experiencing it and putting it down on paper, writing is also you're putting something which is no construct into a constructed form, which goes into paperback, hard copy, soft copy, but there is a construct coming in. And construct invariably talks of checks and balances. How do you marry the two? An unlimited form of experience and checks and balances?
So that comes with practice. Practice not of writing, but of reading.
Okay.
I always say that when I think of myself as an author, that is thanks to the fact that I read so much. You cannot be someone who's creating narratives, sense-making narratives, unless you have been exposed to lots of other sense-making narratives from other people. So writing is essentially also a process of learning through reading other people's work. When you read other people's works, sometimes what happens is that you start thinking, oh, had I been writing this, I would not make this protagonist commit suicide.
Okay.
I would make him go and get married or whatever. And in that, while you're still thinking that, you suddenly understand the reasons why this particular author chose that path, and you learn it and appreciate it for what it is. And from there, you'll actually learn construction of passages. You learn how to mold your thoughts in a certain way, how to direct them towards a certain ending. For example, there are times when stories are written and the author already knows how they are going to end. But there are times when the author actually just has this fabulous character in his or her head and thinks, oh, I have to tell her story, but you don't know what her story is. It is just a fabulous character full of these really interesting things or very banal things that he or she does, but it is worth narrating. It is only somewhere while you're writing that you realize what this character's story is. And all this construction, this process of writing and assimilating thought, I at least have learned from a lot of reading of different kinds across genres, not just fiction. One reads lots of non-fiction, one reads philosophy, one of my greatest passions is also the motion pictures, films.
Okay.
I have studied filmmaking, and I believe that it is, as a discipline, it is one of the most exciting ways of narrating a story, and everything from your light to your camera angle to the direction in which the protagonist is moving, and everything is just symbolically so rich, and it teaches you about narration. So I think that not being constricted to one medium or one kind of narrative, one can really, for example, one of the things that, and I really wanted to share this.
Yes.
When I was little, my dadi used to read out comic books to us. Now, she was a woman who had studied till, say, 8th standard, she used to say. But she could read, but she had these thick glasses, which she never even put while she used to read to us. And I used to think, what is dadi even reading? And dadi was telling us a story, looking at those pictures, which was entirely her story.
Wow.
It had nothing to do with those characters you would see in the comics.
And you guys would be totally engrossed.
We would think that, oh, this is what is happening, and this is an exciting story. And then, sometimes my mom used to read it to us, and we would say, you have no idea, this is not the story.
Right.
Dadi told us.
But that's so powerful to be able to have because a picture anyway speaks 1,000 words. And to be able to construct, I think she must be an amazing person.
She was.
Wow.
And the way she used to create it also, and she would talk in her dialect, and she would tell us the story as if, and so even oral traditions.
Right.
One gets influenced by oral tradition stories that you hear everywhere. Now there's this big movement of archiving and collecting oral stories from across the country. It is so powerful, and there is a structure even in an oral narrative that teaches you, as someone who writes, how to balance yourself.
Right. In fact, one of the most powerful things about stories is that it crosses all age barriers, because a story can hook anyone, irrespective of demographics. Because I think all of us have that creative urge and the desire to see, okay, where is this leading?
Yes.
So when we talk of reading many books, and you do that, and especially with a mind and I think a heart and emotions that absorb so much and experience so deeply, you tend to assimilate a lot. And then you're supposed to create what we call original creativity. How does one draw the fine line between, how do you know that this is something I picked up, or what is it, and this is my creativity?
I mean, I would add one more thing to your question, which lots of people have. It is about which part do you think is autobiographical and which part is your creation, right? What you have, your self-experiences, and what you haven't, it's very difficult to tell. There are so many things that one writes. Maybe sometimes I describe there is this one poem that I absolutely love. It's in Italian. It is the shortest poem that you would have ever heard. It's just 3 words. And in Italian it reads, "M'illumino d'immenso." And it means, I am enlightened by the vastness. And the title of the poem is Cielo e Mare, which means the sky and the sea. So it is just so open, that poem, that I would bring that to the writing process, that when there are so many experiences that one is consciously and unconsciously and subconsciously being subjected to, when I start writing, it is very difficult for me to decide which part is something that came to me in the form of a book that I read, or something that I wanted to change in a book,
right,
or something that I personally experienced, or something that someone told me about. But then again, I write lots of stories with protagonists who are not human. So I write stories of cobras. Cobra is the protagonist. I write the story of a spider. I recently wrote this story which got a lot of attention, which was about this female spider who is also an art connoisseur. And only somewhere along the line she realizes that she's a spider, because otherwise she's, this art person.
Right. That's powerful indeed. Okay.
Yes, and how she sees a cat and believes that was the moment of a big friendship, while the cat actually paws it, and like, I don't know, I mean, it continues, but yes. So what I'm saying, so I'm of course I'm not a spider, but one brings in just so many thoughts and experiences from so many different spheres into this. For example, I'm sure that when I wrote this story, that part of me which was a biology student knew about the life cycle of the spider, how it mates and bears children and all of that, and that kind of from somewhere I didn't even have to pick up a book and read about it.
We'll talk about all that and a lot more just after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still in conversation with author and translator Pratishtha Singh. Pratishtha, your first book, Voter Mata Ki Jai. I mean, very interesting title. Tell us about that.
So it was in 2015 when elections were to be held in Bihar. My husband is from Bihar, and I really love the terrain in Bihar because I find that it's so green and so lush. It is one of the most fertile regions of the country. It is also, unfortunately, one of the most backward and poor places. And I really wanted to go and travel and meet women and see what women thought of elections and voting and all these, things which usually in urban spheres, especially in super urban spheres like New Delhi and Bombay, women try to distance themselves from most of these things. They think that it is not our domain, and plus it is it's so tiresome, and it's not a clean place for for us to spend our thought on. We should talk about music or culture. And I just wanted to know what a rural woman thinks of elections, and does she have an opinion. And it was entirely my own enterprise that I thought I would just drive across Bihar during the elections, and I did that, and I spoke to a lot of women who it was an enlightenment for me, because while I was traveling, I met lots of people. There were people who were there for the elections. There were people who were organizing the elections, and a lot of them told me, "Oh, it's good. We feel that you are empowering the woman." And I was really appalled by the thought, because I said, "I'm not," because empowerment foresees someone having a huge pool of power from which to give a little bit to other people. And that was not what I was doing at all, because I did not have a pool of power. What I felt, although, was each of these women that I met had their own power. And what happened was, when you converse with them, it gives them a chance it gives them a self-realization of that power on some level. When they talk about it, when those words come out of their mouths, they realize that, oh, these are my thoughts. I have an opinion. This came out of me. And that is so to say, you know,
that is empowering.
Self-empowering, that makes them powerful. And I think that is one of the things that I thought was lacking in rural spheres, and I find that in other places in the country as well, that women don't get a chance to, you know, have an adda. Like men have addas where they sit and they talk and they exchange ideas. Rural women necessarily don't do that. Even if they do that with their neighboring, the woman who stays in the neighboring house, it is only limited to family chores and relationships, and that's it. They don't get a platform where they talk about socio-political issues, and given them that, I'm sure they would come up with, because they came up with some brilliant
Because at one
thoughts.
level they also believe that, you know, these are not issues for us to discuss.
Yes.
Our area of operation and work is limited, and these are things the men talk about.
Yes.
You know?
Although what was exciting was a lot of these women in Bihar told me that, oh, let them say whatever they want to say. Let my husband say whatever he wants to say. At the end of it, when I go in and I vote, he would not know which button I've pressed.
Okay.
And I said, really?
So the spirit is so brilliant, you know. The spirit doesn't worry about what form or shape. The spirit is there, it's there.
Absolutely. And it was so surprising for me to find that out. And I came back really enriched, and I was thinking of writing my memoirs, and I was keen to write them in English because it is easier on some level.
Yes.
But then another really powerful person who is my publisher, Vani Prakashan, Aditi Maheshwari, she's this fabulous young girl who said, Pratishtha, you have told me such exciting experiences. You will have to write this in Hindi. And I said, you know, and I used to do lots of audio recordings as well when I used to talk to these women, because they would sing songs. They were beautiful. And so I said, you know, I have so much of content also in Bhojpuri, and I speak Bhojpuri, I've learned it. So let me give it a shot. I tried typing in Hindi, and it was just one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to do. I could not do it. I wrote the entire 70,000 words in hand, in notebooks, and got someone to type it for me. And I thought, and thinking about it, I thought it was a much better idea than writing it in English, because what I did subsequently was go and present this book to all the women who are my protagonists, who I talk about, whose photographs.
They must have been so thrilled.
They were so excited.
Right.
They were so excited that I spoke even about little things, like, you know, they would tell me about the village bhoot. You know, in every village you go, they say that we have a little ghost which lives there under that tree, etc. They were so excited, and it was so good for them to feel, because it talks about all the districts of Bihar. So it was good for them to know that a woman sitting in some other district shares those concerns or talks about them with the same kind of spirit that they do. So I think that's how the book, and it is since it is the first ethnography in Hindi, and that's another thing that I really feel that we lack in, is that we don't have studies. We have scholars in Hindi who are more, you know, prolific in Hindi, but unfortunately, when they actually publish works, they prefer English because obviously most people study in English. I wish there were more studies of this kind, of the social kind, in Hindi, because that would really, that way we can actually seep into that population which knows how to read, but we can't always feed them stories to read.
Right. And you're going to be published in fiction, so tell us a bit about that.
So I have been writing fiction. The first novel that I wrote in Indian English, I started writing it in, I think, 2005, but I finished it only a couple of years ago. So we are now in the process. So like you said, your earlier question about structuring it, I thought I had done a very good job at that.
Okay.
But then there are always these brilliant editors who actually tell you that, you know, this can be structured better this way. So and they're usually constructive, thankfully.
And lots of learning, huh?
Yes,
Right.
there is a lot of learning. But my short stories have been published. My poetry has been published. So there, I think, when a story is shorter, it is usually more difficult, because you are you're telling a story still, but you're telling it in much less words, and so it's not usually, it does not necessarily mean that it's a slice of life sort of a thing. It can be a whole story that spans years and years, and it's just a story. So I'm glad that the editors helped me with that also, but they did not have like very big structural changes. With the novel, we are still in the process of refining it and making it more structurally viable, chronologically more coherent. I write fiction also. There's a famous poem, I don't know if you know this, very short. It says, "A poet writes so that he has something to read."
Well, nice, very nice.
And I think I also write fiction a lot, because I really enjoy rereading. So writing fiction has a lot to do also, thankfully, with rereading. You have to read what you've produced over and over and over again, and make sure that you put that full stop where you like it more or cancel it out. And you have to be ruthless, which is not always easy, because when you're writing, you get so attached.
I know.
To it, right?
I know. And you have lots of thoughts in your heads, and ideas keep coming up. And then you have an idea and you want to start writing. And what happens if midway you lose interest in your book?
Then you leave it. And I have done that. Then you leave it. And also sometimes it happens that you have an idea that comes to you in those 3 minutes when you wake up at 3 a.m. to drink a glass of water. And you start writing it. Thankfully, with the phones that we have, one notes them there, and the next morning it makes absolutely no sense. And you knew that in that moment that was your Nobel winning idea.
Right. And then it's kind of just vanished.
And it's gone.
Right.
But one has to live with that. And yes, you are right, I have done that. That one starts writing something and gets attached to it, and soon enough realizes that it will not be a viable plot or story to pursue. And one leaves that.
Right. So what is the role of discipline in writing?
Huge. There's a huge role of discipline. When I'm not teaching, I make sure that I get up at a certain hour. I'm an early sleeper, so I get up quite early. So I get up on time and I start writing, and I start also rereading everything that I have written as a discipline. If I don't do that, see, if I want to do it as a profession, then I have to give it respect. And only then maybe it will give me respect in return, right? I can't take it easy. I can't think of my job as any less important than any other thing that I do, simply because it does not involve physical movement. Does not necessarily. Sometimes it does, but not always. So I always make sure that I get up and I start writing and I start reading. See, my reading also is something that I consider a part of my writing. It's not like I'm necessarily writing about the same thing.
Okay.
But if I don't read at least 2, 3, 4 hours a day, I feel like I have not eaten.
Okay. It's like a diet for you.
Yeah, I feel not nourished enough.
Okay. And when you're writing and you're disciplined and you've turned out this beautiful piece of work, and then somebody says, okay, let me give you feedback on that. How does criticism or critiquing work for you?
See, if it comes from a family member, you shoot them down.
Okay.
You tell them that they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. But when it comes from a professional sphere, you nod your head and you think about it. But then again, there is and my seniors have always taught me to decide till what point will you make a compromise, because what happens is sometimes stories that one writes are beautiful stories, but they are not right for publication by a certain house, right?
Okay.
Editor. And so they tell you, why it's a beautiful story, why don't we just tweak it a little and make this so that we can publish it?
How does that feel?
And your stomach just turns and you're like, no, but I can't. For example, I'll never forget this, that there was this one story I wrote about a little girl living near the Mississippi River. And everyone really liked that story. And the publisher told me, wow, it's a lovely story. We love the idea and all of that. Our readers are Indian. Can you bring it next to the Shipra Nadi or the... And I was like, you know what, I just cannot. Because, I mean, it did not have any flavor of America, so to say, in that story. But that girl lives next to the Mississippi River. I can't pretend that she lives here, unfortunately. And the same thing with stories that I write here. There are people who are happy to publish me in other parts of the world, in Italy mostly, and they say, why don't if you make that if you explain it just that much more, then we can it'll just go so well with the Italian reader. I said, but I'm not interested in it flowing well for the Italian reader. I want the Italian reader to sit up and see that we use words like beta, even in English when we are writing. We use words like yar, and I would tell you what it means, or you find out. It's not that difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the power of reading, to take you from what you know to what you don't know.
Absolutely. And make you learn.
Right, absolutely. Again, now coming back to your students, you teach. And interacting with young people is another learning by itself.
Yes.
How does this profession work for you?
It is one of the best things that has happened to me, because I don't know what I would have done had I not taught. Not because I like lecturing, but because I really enjoy spending time with them. And when they give ideas, especially when we are studying literature, and I always say studying because I am studying with them, it is just so energetic. It is like a room full of these little energy capsules. Some of them are talking, some of them are eating, and in my class usually the rule is you can walk in and walk out whenever you want. I don't like keeping people chained.
But how does that work for you as a facilitator?
It sometimes is inhibiting. It gives me breaks. Yes, I have to really work around that. But I still find that I give them the leeway of save the excuses. Don't tell me that your dog ate your homework or whatever. But come in. And for those 10 minutes, you're mine. For those 10 minutes, we are in it together. For those 10 minutes, I want your 100%. If you can't attend the entire 50 minutes of the lecture, that's not a problem, leave. But just while you're here, make sure. And I'm finding this increasingly, and lots of my colleagues also feel this, that when you do that, students tend to be there before you enter the class.
Right.
And they are ready with their questions, they are ready with their criticism. A student should always have the possibility of also telling the teacher how he or she feels about, especially in literature and humanities, about a certain piece, and how that thought does not necessarily agree with it. We leave a lot of room for dissent. There should be a room for disagreement and dissent, because humanities is all about that. I would presume also science.
It is
because
supposed
Einstein said that he's talked about relativity, and one would think that it is. So more so in the humanities, and so with my students, I come out, I have a huge smile on my face, and there I have at the end of the session, at the end of the year, I usually have a huge dinner at my place. Huge as in not many things to eat, but just all of us together, like 40 of us sitting down talking about things. And so most of my students are actually great friends also with my husband, because they are always asking for his advice, his career advice. So it's not that we have a family relation. I would not, there are lots of people who mistake it as me being personal. No, I don't think so. I think a good teacher should be involved just this much in their lives, and they should be involved in yours. There has to be a reciprocal exchange of energies, otherwise it just does not work. And when you assess students, and when you read their answers and their assignments, you really get that flavor of the freedom with which a student writes, with talking about, yes, about critics, about authority, about these people said this, but I don't agree because. And if my student makes a reasonable argument, then I let him or her do that.
Right, and that's the openness, and that's where we transition boundaries from understanding that the learning lies beyond the boundary that we know. And I think that's where we need to move out, and young people always help us in that direction. It's been truly wonderful meeting you, Pratishtha. Wishing you all the best with all the other diverse areas that you engage in. But thank you so much in coming and sharing a part of yourself with us today.
Thank you so much. I had a great time, and I must say, when you said all the best, it seemed so sincere, and it's so pleasant to talk to you. Thank you very much. You really made my morning.
Thank you so much. Today is the 7th of February, and as today, people across the world will be making nuggets of history There is also a history associated with this day. Let's take a look. Today, in 1913, the Turks lost 5,000 men in a battle with the Bulgarian army in Gallipoli. In 1915, the first wireless message sent from a moving train to a station was received. In 1940, Walt Disney's second feature-length movie, Pinocchio, premiered in New York City. In 1964, Cassius Clay converted to Islam and was renamed Muhammad Ali. In 1984, space shuttle astronauts Bruce McCandless II and Robert L. Stewart made their first untethered spacewalk. हम सब के साथ जुड़ने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. अगली बार तक नमस्कार.